So let us start our topic. I will just discuss with you about the solving multi-objective optimization problems using the nature-inspired algorithms. And I'm not sure that how many of you have a knowledge of the nature-inspired computing algorithms or even the data structures and algorithms. So I will not go into detail of any algorithm and data structures. Rather, I will just discuss that what is the basic philosophy in which we can solve. So if I am able to inculcate some interest in some of you, so obviously you will go and search and you will find it. And obviously my email and phone number, it will be with you. So if you want to interact with me, you can interact anytime. So not only now, anytime afterwards also. So I just told you that the topic is basically the solving multi-objective optimization problem using nature-inspired algorithm. So usually what the people do is that they move just to the outline. But before I just move to the outline, I will just discuss something about the precursor, that why basically we are discussing this topic and why I have taken it. So many real world problems in almost any domain of the life which you think. I have written here the science, engineering, business, commerce, etc. But this is not an exhaustive list. So if you look the real world problem around us, almost all are the optimization problems. Either this way or that way, we have to basically optimize something. Like for example, if you take the Google search, so even the Google search is also basically a search and optimization problem. So whenever you just give text to the Google, I mean, you just type something in the search string, whatever the search string is. So it just takes that search string and it searches the relevant answers for that particular text which you have typed, and then it checks that which is more relevant and what will be the relevancy order, so that it shows it on the number 1 2 3. So that is also basically a search and optimization problem, because it has to search and it has to optimize it in that way. So if you look for any problem around us, that is basically a optimization problem. So deterministic. So deterministic in bracket, I have written here the mathematical, traditional, classical. So in different books, you will find these different names. So these all are basically same. So deterministic optimization methods are not adequate. I have just emphasized here the not are not adequate to solve these problems effectively, as most of the optimization problems are usually non-linear, non-differentiable, multidimensional, multimodal, stochastic, and computationally time consuming. So this is, again, I will emphasize that this is not an exhaustive list. So I just simply want to emphasize here that most of the there are a lot of problems with these problems are very complex. Okay, I should say that these problems are very complex because they possess either one or few of these characteristics and some more problems also. Because of this, the deterministic methods are not very good to solve them to a efficient level. Though we can use and they will solve, but they may not be able to give you very good solutions. However, in the past couple of decades, the new practical optimization methods, which usually the people call that as non-traditional or the non-classical, based on the natural evolution process, have emerged, and they have found very good for solving such type of the problems. So basically what I want to do today is that I want to take you, I just will start from the optimization, history of the optimization, and then I will take you towards basically the natural evolution algorithms, that how we can use the natural evolution algorithms to solve a problem. And I will discuss the single as well as multi, because I'm not sure that how many of you already are aware of the natural evolution process. So if I directly jump to the multi, it will be difficult. So first I will just give something about the single, and then I will just move on to the multi. So multi-objective. So I'm just setting a pace here that why we are discussing this topic, the optimization. Okay. Then we will just discuss what is optimization, a brief history of optimization, optimization problem and its notations, properties of the optimization problems, classical optimization methods, motivation for evolutionary optimization methods, multi-objective optimization genetic algorithm, and I will just take a specific example of a multi-objective optimization algorithm, that is the NSGA2. So what is basically a optimization? So if you look for the different, I'm not going into the detail of the mathematics, okay? I'm just taking here few definitions from the different dictionaries and some other people, those who have given the definition. So Chambers dictionary describes the optimization as an act of making the most or the best of anything. Theoretically speaking, the optimization means finding the most or the best suitable solution of the problem. So if I just move from the dictionary to a normal common man people, so for a common man people, if the problem is given, so basically what the people want is that they want the most or the best suitable solution for that particular problem. For them, this is basically optimization. The mathematical optimization studies spend a great deal of efforts in describing the properties of an ideal solution. So this is a little bit important. I will just say two, three words about it. And that is whenever we discuss the optimization from the mathematical point of view, or rather I should say the persons, those who do research and those who deal with the mathematics. So most of the time whenever they discuss the optimization problem, they usually discuss the description of the problem, the solution, that what is the property of the problem, what will be the property of the solutions, rather than emphasizing much and more on the algorithms or the ways that how to solve it. I don't say that they do not give the algorithms to solve it, but their emphasis is basically on the properties of the problem as well as the solution strategies. Engineering or the practical optimization studies, on the other hand, look for the solution which is as similar to an ideal solution as possible. And whenever I just took the optimization problem from the engineering or the practical point of view, so what I think is that what is the best solution which I can find out in a limited time and the limited space. When I say the time and space, I mean to say the computational complexity and the space complexity, because being an computer engineer, I always thinks in these terms. So basically, the computer scientists or the those who are there to solve the problem using the algorithms and designing the algorithms, they are mostly looking into it. And otherwise, also they are not very much concerned that whether they will be really able to go to the optimal solution. Suppose if the problem is very real, is really very tough, and it is not possible to find an ideal solution, then they cannot sit idle, that okay, it is not possible to find the ideal solution means the optimal solution. In that case, what they do is that they try to approximate the ideal solution. So when I say the approximate the ideal solution means by somehow some means they try to reach to the optimal solution, whether it is optimal or suboptimal. But if it is a very good solution which is not available by any other method, then we are happy with it, that okay, this is the best solution till now for this problem, so let us use it and solve and do our work. Okay, so that is basically written here, that although the ideal optimal solution is desired, the restrictions on the computing power and the time often make the practitioners happy with an approximate solution. So this basically I have tried to make this slide so that I just start with the what is definition of a optimization in the dictionaries to basically how the engineers and the scientists they think of the optimization problem, that somehow we have to get a very good solution, if not ideal, somehow, so that we can get a solution, practical solution, basically workable solution, I mean to say. A brief history of the optimization. So obviously I have no intention to go into the details of the history, so just only I think the two slides are there for the brief history of the optimization, so that you know that how it started. So the practical optimization began in the Second World War because of the need for the efficient deployment of the resource allocation of the military personnel and the accessories became important. So during the Second World War, 1941-45, at that time there was a great need that resources were depleting very fast because the war was prolonged for a long duration, and always it was not only the resources of the uh, resources of the physical resources, I mean to say, rather the human resources also, everything was a problem. So they thought that how they can deploy or how they can use the resources in a very efficient way. So that basically started the practical optimization. So practical optimization started basically from the Second World War. However, most of the developed most methods basically. However, most of the developed methods were in the classical optimization domain, as the developed methods use the fundamental ideas from the geometry and the calculus to reach the optimum solution in an alternative manner. So this is also an important thing, because obviously the persons, those who tried to solve the problems, they were mathematicians, and they always just thought of from the mathematics point of view. They use basically the geometry, calculus and other aspects, so that how we can find the solution of the optimization problems. These optimization methods have enjoyed a good 50 years of research, and applications are still going on very strong. So I do not want to deeming that this is not a way to solve a problem. Rather, this is the a very good way to solve the problems, and it is there in the literature for last 50 years, and still a lot of people are working to find a very good ideal solutions if it is possible for the very complex problems also. However, around the middle of the 80s, less mathematical but efficient optimization methods in non-classical domain were suggested mostly by the computer scientists. But because these were very tough and only the mathematicians can understand and solve the problems, so computer scientists basically they developed some algorithms which were in the non-classical domain. When we say the non-classical domains means they usually do not use the geometry and calculus, and the problem is specific or the problem domain knowledge. So that is the most important thing, and that is why these algorithms are very popular to solve the search and optimization problems. So I will just discuss here the two important which are famous. It's not so that they are the only two. You can think of a nature-inspired computing algorithms in a very broad way. It's a very umbrella word which encompasses a lot of things. But I have made it with respect to, with reference to my lecture basically, or my talk. So the population-based nature-inspired computing methods cut a lion's share in the non-classical methods. I have just written it to be specific that these are the not only thing, a lot of things are there, but they are very prominent. These methods are primarily subcategorized in the evolutionary based and the swarm intelligence based methods, as it is written here that optimization methods, they can be, sorry, they can be the deterministic methods, the mathematical or the classical methods, and the other can be the stochastic or the non-classical method. So stochastic means because they have a randomness also, there is a randomness in the algorithm, so that is why they are known as a stochastic. In the stochastic, they may be the population based, they may be the non-population based, so I am talking of a population based. In the population based, we have the nature inspired algorithms, and these nature inspired algorithms are usually categorized as the evolutionary algorithm, which are based on the nature's evolution principle. And the another category of the algorithms are known as the swarm intelligence based algorithms, and they are basically based on the foraging behavior of the species, that how they search the food. When we come to the evolutionary methods, so we have the genetic algorithms, we have differential evaluation, genetic programming, a lot of other methods are there. So I have made it bold just simply because NSGA2 that we will discuss little bit, that basically belong to the genetic algorithm category. So that is why this is bold. So this is what basically is a chronology you can just think of the optimization methods which we are going to do, which we are going to discuss today, and that is basically the evolutionary based algorithm and specifically the genetic algorithm. So what is the basic principle of the evolutionary algorithm? So in one sense, you can just think of that I have set the pace, that what is basically the optimization when it is started and what are the mathematical models. I think most of you belong to the mathematics domain. So some of you may be working on these problems. So you may know, you obviously would be knowing that how to solve the mathematical problems and optimization problems. So I will not deal that. So I have just told that we are going into basically the another class of the algorithms which are known as a nature inspired algorithms. Even in the nature inspired algorithms also I am talking of the evolutionary algorithm. So I just tell you here in this slide that what is basically the basic principle of the evolutionary algorithms. So the space of all good and bad feasible solutions to the underlying problem, that is the desired or the optimal solution also reside here is called basically a search space, and this is also known as a state space. Each possible solution can be marked by a fitness function. So what we say that we view the problem as if we have been given basically a search space, and it is full of the solutions, and the number of solutions are obviously too large, because if the number of solutions is very small, then instead of using maybe the classical optimization method or the non-classical optimization method, if it is really too small, then we can just go for the exhaustive search also, and using the exhaustive search we will get the optimal solution. So that is the ideal way. But definitely, because the search spaces are usually too huge, they are too large, and it is not possible to solve the problem using the exhaustive search, just because of a time complexity. So if suppose that is the case, then we assume that it's basically a search space. That search space consists of the millions, billions, or say countably infinite solutions are there. Out of those solutions, so that is basically a search space. So a group of the solutions, countable infinite or the finite solutions, maybe billions or trillions, that is basically a search space. And the search space may have the feasible solutions as well as the non-feasible solutions. So how it will be the feasible and non-feasible, it depends basically on the constraints, that what are the constraints with the problem. And obviously there will be basically a bounding box which bounds that this is the area in which we will go for the searching of the solution. We cannot search any solution basically in an infinite search space. Okay, so just please remember that obviously the bounding box will always be there. When I say the bounding box means whatever the input parameters x1, x2, x3, x4 variables are there, so they will be bounded by some lower value and some upper value. So they make basically a feasible search space. Sorry, I should not use the word feasible. So they make basically a search space. Okay, and which is a bounded. Okay, because we cannot think of finding a solution in the infinite search space. So in that way we have the bounded search space, and in that bounded search space there may be some constraints also. So within that bounded search boundary also, some solutions may be feasible and some solutions may not be feasible. All the solutions which do not adhere to the constraints, they are infeasible, and all the solutions which adhere to the constraints means which are okay with respect to all the constraints, they are the feasible solution. So basically we are concerned only with the feasible search space. So in the search space, the feasible search space may be further subset of it, or it may be the same set. Basically it depends on the constraints. Each possible solution can be marked as a fitness. So now we say that we have basically a lot of solutions, and we have to find that which one is the best one. So obviously when more than one solutions are there, there must be some way by which we can define that what is the quality of this solution, whether this solution is good or bad, or we can compare the two solutions and say what is good, what is bad. So for that reason we should have basically some way so that we can decide, and that some way is basically the fitness function. So we have basically a feasible search space, a lot of solutions are there, and each solution is marked basically by a one fitness function which tells the quality or the goodness of that particular solution. Evolutionary algorithms mimic the natural evolutionary principle on randomly picked solutions from the search space of the problem and iteratively progress towards the optimum point. So what basically these evolutionary algorithms do, that is written here in this paragraph. Suppose if you take that this white visible screen, that is basically a search space, for example. Okay, and if I take a just dot here, a dot here, a dot here, suppose each dot is representing basically solution. Suppose somewhere my optimal solution is here, for example. What these algorithms do is that they generate the solutions randomly. So suppose all the random solutions are scattered somewhere here, for example, or some solutions are here also, some solutions are here also. So it's basically a iterative process, which in each iteration will move all these solutions which were generated randomly, or it is not necessary that they have to be generated randomly only. If you know some other good methods for the generation of a good solutions, you can use that also as a start point. And finally, they will try to reach basically to the optimal solution, which is here. So iteratively, they will move to this place, I mean the optimal solution. So that is the principle of the evolutionary algorithm. The nature's ruthless selective advantage of the fittest individuals and creation of new and more fit individuals using recombinative and mutative genetic processing with generations is well mimicked artificially in a computer algorithm. So this is, you can say, more specific things, or we are just moving towards specific things in the EA, that what happens here. So this is a very basic principle which I told you, that how the things work, and how why it has developed, or what is the basic principle. So the basic principle is that it mimics basically the evolution principle of the nature. What happens in the nature? In the nature, we see that a male and the female, two different entities of the same species, they do the mating, and in the mating they generate basically a new offspring or a children, and that children is supposed to possess the good qualities of the male as well as the female, means both the parents. And usually you will find naturally also that always the new generation is going to be more smart and more better in comparison to the previous generation. So the fitness of the generation, average fitness of the generation always improves generation by generation, or if you take a one generation as iteration, so you can say iteration by iteration. So exactly the same thing is done here in case of the EAs also, that they mimic basically the natural evolution principle, that the solutions will generate the new solutions like a child, and then slowly it will move iteration by iteration or generation by generation to the optimal solution. The task of an evolutionary optimization algorithm is then to avoid a bad solutions in the search space, take clues from the good solutions, and eventually reach close to the best solution, similar to the genetic processing in the natural system. So what we have to do, what these algorithms do, obviously if they are going to generate each and every solution, then it will be something like exhaustive search, and we are not going for that, because the size of the solutions is, I mean, the size of the feasible search space is too large. So what we have to do, we have to just see that what are the good quality of the solutions, what is the genetic nature of the solutions, and we have to generate the solutions which are smarter and which are better than that. So we have to avoid basically the bad solutions, and we have to generate the good solutions, and in this way we have to reach to the optimal solution, and if it is not possible, to the best solution which is possible. So this is basically what we do in the evolutionary algorithm. So I think now it must be very clear that what is basically the evolutionary algorithm. So I just start here with the single objective optimization. So if I just take a single objective optimization, so I say minimize or the maximize, I could have written here the optimize also, fx. So we say that there is a one function which is defined in a search space. I've written here the x. So this x doesn't mean that it's only the x1. So this x indicates basically a point in the search space which can be which can process uh, uh, any number of dimensions. I mean the x1, x2, x3, etc. And then there are some constraints also. So there are some inequality constraints. They are in the nature of greater than equal to, it is written here, but obviously they can be less than equal to also. So there is a one duality principle, and the duality principle simply says that if it is less than equal to, you just put a minus sign and it will be converted into greater than equal to. So you can convert from the one to the other and the vice versa by the duality principle. So there are some constraints which are inequality constraints in nature, and that is 1 to j. So any j may be any integer. Then we say the hkx is equal to 0. Then we have basically some equality constraints. So I think I need not to say that the equality constraints are more stricter in comparison to the inequality constraints. So there are some constraints, and then this simply indicates that each variable is basically bounded in some lower and the upper range. So this is between the lower and the upper range, each xi is bounded, and the I may be anything 1 to n. So all these are integers. So what we have to do here, fx is the objective function, this one. So this is basically an objective function of n variables. To be specific, I have written here of n variables because n I have written here, which is to be optimized. So this objective function is to be optimized. A solution X is feasible only if the inequality constraints G and the equality constraints H are satisfied. And obviously we are looking the solutions only in the bounded search space. So we are looking in the feasible search space. So the solutions which satisfy the G and the H, they are the feasible solutions. Only they are the feasible solutions. Rest are not the feasible solutions. The search is restricted within the search space defined by the lower and the upper bound of each variable, and the set of all feasible solutions is called the feasible search space, which I just told you is same is written here. Usually there exists at least one solution X in the feasible space which corresponds to the optimum objective value. This solution is called the optimum solution, and this is what basically we are looking for. So I have written here that there exists at least one solution, just simply because it is not necessary that there may be only one solution. It may have more than one solution also. And if the problem is multimodal, then we just usually talk of a local optimal solution and the global optimal solution. So in the whole search space, the solution which is the real optimal, so that is basically the global optimal solution. And it may happen that the search space is complex. It is in such a way that in a vicinity of the area, one of the solution is very good, which is the minimum one. Suppose if I say that this is a part of the search space area, and in this search space, this is one which is a very good solution in comparison to all the solutions which are in this subspace. So a particular solution which is optimum in the subspace, okay, or the sub search space, whatever you call that, that is basically the local optimal solution. So our job is basically to find the global optimal solution and not the local optimal solution, because we have to look for what is the best, what is the best, not the local best. So thus the task in an optimization process is to start with a few random solutions in the search space and utilize the function and constraint functions to derive its search towards the feasible reason, and finally reach near the optimal solution or to the optimal solution by exploring as small set of solutions as possible. Obviously, a algorithm which takes a very less solutions, or which takes basically a minimum iterations to reach to the optimal solution, that will be the better one, because the time complexity is better. So our job is that we have to reach to the optimal solution by exploring as little solutions as possible. So what are the properties of the optimization problems? Many problems consist of a non-differentiable and discontinuous objectives and the constraints. Many problems consist of discrete decision variables, hence the search space also become discrete, which is difficult to solve in continuous problems. And I'm not going to explain these things because I think that all of you have a background of the mathematics, so everyone knows these things. But I'm just emphasizing it here, that what are the problems or what are the properties with the optimization problems. So the problems may have the mixed types. It means they may have a real, discrete, boolean, permutation, etc. of the variables. Means in a single problem, the variables maybe one may belong to the real, other may be discrete, something like this. The problems may have the highly non-linear objective and constraint functions due to complicated relationship and equations which the decision variables must form and satisfy. This makes, rather I should have written here that these make them non-linear optimization problem. There may be uncertainties associated with the decision variables, due to which the optimum solution may not be much importance to a practitioner. The objective and the constraint functions may be noisy and may be the non-deterministic. The evaluation of the objective and the constraint functions is computationally expensive. Then obviously the computational complexity will be higher. The problems give rise to the multiple optimal solutions of which some are globally best and many others are locally optimal. This I already discussed. And that I'm just talking here basically the global optimal solution and the local optimal solution. Then this one is related to basically the multi-objective problems, that the problems involve the multiple conflicting objectives. And if we have the multiple conflicting objectives, then it is not possible that we will get basically a one solution which is the best one, but rather we get a set of the solutions, and where none of the solution can be thought of as a very good in comparison to the other one. So that is basically known as a Pareto front. So that we will discuss. So what is basically the classical optimization methods, and what is the basic philosophy? I'm just generalizing it here. Obviously, you may be more expert in solving the classical optimization problems using the operation, whatever the algorithms that we discuss in the operation research. Okay, so this is basically a very general phenomena for those who are not into this field, that what is basically the basic principle of the optimization method. The classical means basically the mathematical methods, okay, or deterministic in some sense. So the general working principle of these methods is as follows. Start with a random guess solution. Like for example, in this diagram or in this image, this is basically the initial guess. So we just guess basically a one solution, and this is the starting point. And this is basically the feasible search space. Like if you just see, and if you just view it as a two-dimensional problem. So say for example, this is the variable x1 and this is the variable x2. So this is the lower of the x1, this is the higher of the x1, this is lower of the x2, and this is the higher of the x2. So this is basically a search space. In this search space, some constraints are there, and because of these constraints, all this space which is here, okay, which is outside this boundary, so they are the invisible search space, and which is here inside this boundary, so this is basically the feasible search space. So as it is written here, the feasible decision space. So in this we have to see that what is basically the optimum solution, and say for example this is the optimal solution. So how these algorithms usually proceed? So they start with a random guess, and then based on the pre-specified transition rule, so we have a pre-specified transition rule which may or may not use the derivative informations, etc. Okay, it depends basically on the algorithm. So they use the pre-specified transition rule, and the method suggests a search direction which is often arrived at by considering local information. So by using the transition method of the algorithm, suppose it's moving here in this direction and it stops here. So after a one iteration, we have come basically to this particular solution. A one-dimensional search is then performed along the search direction to find the best solution. This best solution becomes the new solution. Go to step 2 until the stopping criteria is satisfied. Then we will just come here and again we will apply the transition rule. So in the next iteration, suppose we come here. In the next iteration, we come here. So in the iterative process, by using the fixed transition rules, we will somehow come to this solution if it is possible by the algorithm to achieve this solution. So if you just look for the classical optimization methods also, so they start with the one solution, they use the fixed transition rules, and they are also basically iterative in nature, because in each iteration they move towards the optimal solution. So this is how the classical optimization methods also work. So deterministic methods may be of the two types, that is the direct methods and the gradient based methods. So in case of the direct methods, what are these, and what is basically the gradient based methods that is written here? So only in case of the direct methods, only the objective function and the constraints are used to guide the search strategy. And here what we do, we use basically the derivatives, the gradient based methods also. I mean, we use the gradient information also. So in case of the gradient based, as the name indicates, these methods use the gradient based methods for the first and or the second order derivatives of the objective function and or constraints to guide the search space. Then these, I mean the gradient based methods, these methods quickly converge to an optimal solution but are non-efficient in non-differentiable or discontinuous problem, because they use the derivative information. So they are not very much suitable, or they are not good for the non-differentiable or the continuous problem, just simply because we are not able to find the derivatives there. And if we just come to the direct methods, they do not use the derivative information. So this is a plus point. Since derivative information is not used, these methods are usually slow and require many function evaluation for the convergence. So here the input of the problem specific knowledge into the search method is very minimal. So that is why obviously they will take more number of iterations. So that is why they are slow in convergence. For the same reason, I mean, for this reason, I mean, they do not use the derivative information. For the same reason, they can be applied to many problems without a major change in the algorithm. So because they use a least problem specific knowledge, so by just tweaking them little bit, we can use to a majority of the problem which are in the different domains. So it has some plus points, some negative points. The same is here, it has some plus points and some negative points. Right now we are talking of a discriminative methods, means the mathematical or the classical optimization methods. So the common pitfalls of these methods, means the common problems which are there are just written here. That basically I'm just setting the pace that why we are moving towards the evolutionary algorithm. So convergence to an optimal solution depends on the chosen initial solution. So this is a very big hurdle. Most methods are prone to get stuck to a suboptimal solution. So this is another big problem. A method efficient in solving the one problem may not be efficient in solving a different other problem. So they are basically, in some sense, you can say like a heuristic, that they are the problem dependent. They are not efficient in handling problems having discrete variables or highly non-linear and many constraints. So if these are the attributes of the problem, then it will be difficult to solve them using the classical optimization methods. They cannot be efficiently used on a parallel computer. So these are the few things which most of the books which deals with the evolutionary algorithm or the soft computing, they discuss these problems of the classical optimization method. So that they say that why basically we are discussing the evolutionary algorithms. So the motivation for the evolutionary optimization method: it is commonly believed that the main driving principle behind the natural evolutionary process is the Darwin's survival of the fittest principle. The nature ruthlessly follows these two principles. And what are these? These are just written here. If by genetic processing an above average offspring is created, it means the offspring or the child is good. It usually survives longer than an average individual and thus have the more opportunities to produce the offspring having some of its traits than the average individual. It means simply we say that the solution which is better has a better chance to do the mating and produce the children. And if it is better solution, means its genetic material is better. So obviously it will generate a good solutions, and that we see in every species. Whenever I talk of the species in the nature, it doesn't mean that I am talking only the animals. Rather, if you just see the this jungle, I mean say vegetables. Vegetables means a vegetation. So like trees, etc. So they also follow this principle. Like you may have seen that if you just see any tree, so you will just see that the number of flowers are there. If each and every flower is transferred into a fruit, then probably the tree will be nowhere. So you will just see that a lot of birds will be there. Not all the birds will make the flower, and not all the flowers will be transformed into the fruits. So this is basically a natural evolution principle. And it is, I just simply gave this example because you should not think that this is only in the species like the animals, etc. Okay, because these trees, etc. are also the living animals, not animals, sorry, they are the living entities. So this principle applies to them also. The other one is, if on the other hand a below average offspring is created, it usually does not survive longer and thus gets eliminated quickly from the population. So we simply say that if it's a good solution, I mean it's a good entity, then it will get the chance for the reproduction. And if it is not a good entity, it is a weaker entity, then it will not get the chance for the reproduction. and this is how the nature evolves, and more better solutions means more and more entities of the species are produced. And if you just somehow anytime if you have seen the Discovery or the National Geographic or BBC and all these channels, so you must have seen this, that what is the nature evolution principle of the different species, maybe lions or panthers or anything, how they behave and how the things basically process. So I think now you can understand basically what I want to emphasize here. I don't want to go in those specific details, genetic and all these things, because it will take a lot of time. The motivation of the evolutionary optimization methods, we're still continuing there. So the principle of emphasizing good solutions and eliminating the bad solutions seems to fit well with the desired properties of a good optimization algorithm. So we simply, I'm just basically writing here that how and why whatever the natural evolution principle is there, it fits in a better way, so that we can find a good optimal solution, or we can make an algorithm out of it. However, what is a real connection between an optimization procedure and a natural evolution? In other words, whether the natural evolutionary process try to maximize some utility function. So obviously, is there any relation? Whether there is some utility function also in the nature, which nature tries to maximize. What's written here is, just see, a careful analysis reveals that the nature tries to maximize a number of optimization functions. Okay, so not only the one, rather a lot of optimization functions are there which nature tries to optimize. For example, the lifespan of the species, the quality of life of a species, physical growth, etc. I have not written the etc because easy is written here. So you can just think of that these all are something like a optimization objective functions, and the nature tries to optimize these objective functions, that how to think for the physical growth. And when we say the physical growth means we have to take care of the natural resources also, that in the natural resources how we can, how the species can grow. Like for example, if the resources are very limited and the population is too high, then there will be a fight for the resources, and they will not get, I mean the species, the entities of the species, they will not get the proper food. So they will not be that much stout, and they may not be that taller, they may not be that good, or so that all is there basically. So in the natural resources constraints the physical growth. Okay, similarly the quality of a life of a species. So if there is no fight for the resources, then the quality of the life also will be good, and the lifespan of the species also will be good, and a lot of other objective functions can also be thought of which the nature tries to optimize. However, these functions are non-stationary and largely depends on the evolution of other related species, because simply we say here that the resources you can think of are not in a way that they share with each other. Like for example, we the persons, those who live on the surface of the earth, on the land, we do not have any sharing of the resources with the animals, those who live in the sea. Similarly, the sea creatures do not have to share their resources with the land. But if suppose we take up the land, so we have a lot of species which live in the jungle and we live in the cities. So if the boundary becomes blur, then there will be basically a fight for the resources, and the problems will come and the nature will behave accordingly. So that is basically the meaning of this, that however these functions are non-stationary and largely depends on the evolution of the other related species. So if a new species is developed and it shares the resources, then it will affect basically everyone. Thus, in essence, the nature optimizes a much more complicated objective function simultaneously by means of a natural genetics and the natural selection, that the search and optimization problems we are interested in solving in practice. So rather, what basically I say here is that the nature is solving basically a more complicated multi-objective optimization problem instead of a single objective optimization problem. So this is basically I'm trying to relate the nature's evolutionary principle with algorithmic way that we think of as a evolutionary algorithm. So thus the computerized evolutionary algorithms are not as complex as the natural genetics and the selection pressure procedures. Rather, they are the abstraction of the complex natural evolutionary process. However, they are robust enough and are able to efficiently solve various search and optimization problems. So we say that we do not follow the natural evolution process as such because it is too complex and we have a limitation of our technology. If we try to if you try to mimic it exactly, then probably we will not be able to, I mean, the hardware will not be able to support it. So what we do is that whatever is the important aspect of the natural evolution principle, we just take that, and from that we have developed the algorithms which are basically the search and optimization problems and which try to optimize some fitness functions. The genetic algorithm, what is the origin of it? The idea of using the evolutionary principles to constitute a computerized optimization algorithm was suggested by a number of researchers located in geographically different places across the globe. And the genetic algorithm which we are talking of, it is basically developed by John at the John Holland University. Sorry, by the John Holland at the University of Michigan. So it was basically his PhD research thesis. So genetic algorithm. The other similar approach is basically the evolutionary strategy. It was originated by the two researchers in the Germany at the Berlin Technical University of the Berlin, and the another one very similar approach, that is evolutionary programming. It was originated by the Larry Fogel in Europe. So we are basically discussing here in the genetic algorithm. So what is the basics and the terminology of a genetic algorithm? So that is written here. The genetic algorithm is an iterative optimization procedure that we have already discussed. Instead of working with a single solution in each iteration, it works with a number of solutions in each iteration, and the number of solutions collectively, they are known as a population. So, if you just remember, I already told you that we have basically a population of the solutions. Okay, population-based solution. Whenever I was categorizing them, in the absence of any knowledge of the problem domain, it begins its search from a random population of solutions. If a termination criteria is not satisfied, three different operators, that is the reproduction, crossover, and the mutation, they are applied to update the population of the solutions. One iteration of these operators is known as a generation. Since the representation of a solution is similar to a natural chromosome and operators are similar to the genetic operators, it is known as a genetic algorithm. So what is the basic principle of the genetic algorithm that is written here? That what happens is that we start basically with the initial population. If we do not have any good method to generate the solutions, we can start with the random solutions, and if we have other method, we can generate the solutions using that. Then what we do, we just check here that whether we have reached to the optimal solution. So obviously anyone can think of that I am generating the random solutions, so they may not be the obviously no solution will be the best one. So definitely we will enter into this. So this one loop is basically a one generation. So this iteration is basically a generation. So we check it here, and suppose this is not the best solution. So we will come here, and that is basically the reproduction. So the reproduction is basically a selection operation. So what we do here in the reproduction is that so this solution will be this solution is basically for the initial only. Later on the solutions will be changed in this iteration or in this generation. So whatever is the previous generation solutions are there, they will be considered, and we will see that which of the solutions are the best solutions in these and which are the bad solutions. So the bad solutions will be eliminated and the multiple copies of the good solutions will be generated. And if you remember, we just discussed here that what are the basic principle under Darwin's theory, that how the things are happen. The above average means the good, they will generate, and those who are bad, they will not generate. So this is basically the selection that we are doing, basically a selection here. So all the good solutions will be multiple in number so that the population size is fixed and the bad solutions will be eliminated. So this is reproduction, means basically the selection of a good solutions. Then what we do is we basically go for the crossover operation, and this crossover operation is basically the mating, where the mating of the two, then from this, now this is basically, this is known as a mating pool. The output of the reproduction or the selection, that is known as a mating pool. So from the mating pool randomly we took, basically we take the two solutions, and those two solutions are termed as a parents, and these parents will do the mating and they will generate the children. So the two parents generating the children, that is known as basically the crossover. And then we will take the crossovers in the mutation phase, and they may or may not mutate. So here the, and all these operations, I mean the crossover mutations, they are done basically the probability with some probability. So probability of crossover and the probability of mutation. So probability of crossover is more because we want more and more mating to be done so that the new solutions are generated, and we want the mutation to be less. Just because if the mutation is too high, I mean the probability of mutation is more, then what will happen? More and more genes will change. And if more and more genes will change, then what does it mean? Whatever is the good genetic material which was there in the mating pool, we are disturbing them. It means basically in the mutation, if it is too high, then probably it may make a good solution a bad solution also. So that is why it should not be more. So I have just told you, okay, then this gives basically a one set of the solutions, means a new generation. And then again we will come here and we will check that whether this is a good solution, whether we have reached to the optimal solution or not. If not, then again this iteration will just go on. So in a very abstract way, I have just told you that what is the very basic principle of a genetic algorithm, and whether this is a multi-objective or the single objective, it doesn't matter. The basic principle of the genetic algorithm is exactly same. You just remember this, and whenever we will discuss the multi-objective, you will just see that is exactly the same one without any change. Then we come to the multi-objective optimization problems now. So you just see that what is written here is that maximize or the minimize fmx m is equal to 2 to m, subject to some inequality constraints, some equality constraints, and the variable bounds. So if you just refer this slide with the earlier slide where we were discussing about the single objective optimization, you will find as if it is exactly the same. The only difference is that here we have the m, and there it was written just only the fx. And obviously if m is equal to 1, then it will be basically termed as a single objective optimization. And if m is 2 and more than 2, then this is basically a multi-objective optimization. So here when I say the m is equal to 2, means basically there are two objective functions, the f1x and the f2x. Okay, and we have to optimize them simultaneously with these equality and inequality constraints and within the variable bounds. Where, I mean here, the x1, x2, xn is a solution vector in X, means in the search space, which is a set of the feasible solutions, means in the feasible search space basically. The objective vector, which is fx, is f1x, f2x, fmx, maps a solution vector x in the decision space to the objective space of m is greater than equal to 2. So it will be more clear when we will discuss here. So what basically I want to discuss and describe here is that the multi-objective problems are little bit more difficult from this point of view. Obviously a lot of other difficulties are also there. I mean from space point of view, that in case of a single objective optimization, because the search space and the objective space, they are usually ordered. So that is why whether you are working in the decision space, I mean in the search space, or in the objective space, it doesn't make a difference. And we usually do not think of it also, and we say that okay, this is a search space and we are searching because it is almost completely ordered. But in case of a multi-objective optimization, it is not so. And it is just because of a non-linearity and non-convexity and some other lot of problems are there. Because of this, we usually have to think of the two different spaces, that is the search space and the objective space. And what is this basically? If you just refer here this x1 x2 and here the f1 f2, then the things will be clear. So we say the decision space or the search space, as the name indicates, we are talking basically in the variable bounds. Sorry, I should not use the word bound. In the variable domains, basically the x1, x2, x3, etc. Okay, the search space. What is the value of the x1, x2, xn, etc. So this is basically the search space. When we take these values of the parameters from the parametric stack, we take these values and we put them into the objective function fx. Okay, this fx, that f1x, f2x, fmx. So when we put these values into this, so it maps basically it into the objective space. And you just see that the size, sorry, the shape of the decision space or the search space is different than the objective space. So there is no correspondence in this a way that it will be exactly same. I mean, the objective space and the decision space will be having a one-to-one correspondence like this, because I say that they are usually not ordered. They are usually the partially ordered. And here you just see that the domains are basic, sorry, the uh, axes are basically the f1 and the f2. So whenever we map it using the objective function, so in the objective space, in the objective domain, we say that the objective space is basically an objective domain where we are talking of objectives. So for example, we have to maintain the diversity or convergence, etc. So we usually think that whether we have to think of these terms in the search space or the objective space. So one of the complexity basically arises because of the dealing of the two different search spaces, and the one is a search space and the another one is a objective space. So this is basically the first problem. The other one is that there is no single solution to the problem. Instead, we get a set of solutions known as a Pareto optimal set. So in case of a multi-objective optimization problems, it is not possible to get basically a one single solution which will be the best, and we will get basically a set of solutions which are equal, and no one is better than the other one, and they are the best than the other solutions. So basically, in case of the multi-objective optimization, we are basically looking for this particular set of solutions where no solution is better than the other with each respect to each other, but they are better than the other solutions. And this is known as a Pareto. This set is known as a Pareto optimal set. So basically, our job in the multi-objective optimization problems is to find basically the Pareto optimal set. So this is what we aim. Search space further adds the complexity as it is only partially ordered, and which I just told you here, explained it here, that there is no one-to-one correspondence here. And the most multi-objective optimization problems are NP hard. So whenever you will find the multi-objective, so you can just think of that the problem will be very hard, and most of them are usually the NP hard, means they are difficult. Those who have studied about the algorithm analysis and design, they will just understand what is the meaning of it. It means solving the such problems to optimality is very difficult. So there are two approaches to solve the multi-objective problem. So I just I gave you here that what are the different complexities and what we basically aim in the multi-objective optimization. So there are two different approaches to solve the multi-objective. MO means the multi-objective optimization. Multi-objective optimization. So that is the MO problems. The one is known as a posteriori approach, that is the ideal multi-objective optimization procedure. We call that as a ideal also. And the another one is a preference based procedure. So this I mean, this classification, that whether it's a ideal or whether it's a preference based, this was basically given by the Cohen. So Cohen is basically a one researcher. So in 1985 he gave this classification. After that, in 1999, Mitting, MITTING, there was another researcher, the Mitting, he gave another classification, and his classification was the no preference based method, the posteriori method, the a priori method, and the interactive method. but that didn't become too much popular, and this classification is still more popular, so I am taking this one. So obviously these two are there, the posteriori and the a priori are already there in the Mitten classification in 1999, and the other two are the no preference method and the interactive method. So I will just take the last one first. So as the name indicates, the interactive method, so here basically the decision maker is a part of the search process of the solution, and he just checks and he guides basically that now the search should be in this direction or that direction. So he is basically decision maker, that is known as a decision maker. So decision maker is a part of the solution process and he guides the search. So that is basically the interactive method, so you can guess it also very easily. Then if I just talk of a no preference method, so in now obviously first I must discuss what is the posteriori, and then I can make a distinction of these two. But anyway, let me just take it here because I have taken that right now. So in case of the no preference method, this posteriori is also basically a no preference method. But the difference is that in case of the no preference method, which is by the Mitten, usually we discuss about the heuristics, that no preference information is considered, but they are mainly the heuristics, which are the problem is specific solutions for a problem. So that is basically the no preference information. And this ideal multi-objective optimization procedure, that is a posteriori methods, here we are talking of basically the meta heuristic. So all such algorithms, like for example the evolutionary swarm, etc., they all are known as a meta heuristic. So I'm just using another word, and this meta they are known as meta heuristic just simply because they are not problem specific. Usually what happens is that you can apply them to solve a wide variety of the problems, and they will be able to give you a good solution. So that is why they are also known as a meta heuristic. So because we are talking of a meta heuristic, so we will stick basically to this particular classification of the meta heuristics or the algorithms. So first we talk of a posteriori method. So what is basically the posteriori? This diagram basically indicates the whole procedure, that what basically is done in the posteriori procedure. So find the multiple trade-off optimal solutions with a wide range of values for the objectives. Okay, then choose one of the obtained solutions using the higher level information. So this, if you call it step one, and if you call this as step two, so this is basically step one and this is step two. So what we do is that we have basically a multi-objective optimization problems to minimize F1, F2, FM, etc. So what we do is that we use basically a ideal multi-objective optimizer. So when I say the ideal multi-objective optimizer means basically I'm talking of a multi-objective optimization algorithm, and this is what basically we have to think of, and this is what we are creating, this is what basically we are discussing right now. So this is the multi-objective optimization algorithm. It will give me basically the Pareto optimal set. So this is basically the Pareto optimal set. This is the multiple trade-off solutions, and obviously we are not going to use all the solutions, we will be using only a one particular solution. So we will use basically the high level information, and with the help of the high level information I may choose that okay, I will go for this solution or I may go for this solution. In this example, the person is going, I mean the decision maker is going for this solution. So what is the posteriori approach? The posteriori approach is that we do not use any problem specific knowledge, we do not use any domain knowledge, and when I say the domain knowledge means preference, basically preference of the objectives. So we do not use any preference of the objectives while we are solving the problem and getting the solutions. Once the solutions have been obtained, then we see that okay, what is the solution that we have to choose, and whenever we have to choose a solution, at that time we may have to look for the preference of the objective. So this is basically the ideal one, or which is the posteriori, which I just told you is written here in the slides. So ideally an effort is made to find a set of the trade-off optimal solutions by considering all objectives to be equally important. We do not say that which is preferable. After a set of such trade-off solutions are found, a user can then use the higher level qualitative consideration to make a choice. So this is basically the step one, and this is basically the step two. With this approach, it is clear that the single objective optimization problem is a degenerate case of multi-objective optimization problem. Means we say that this single objective optimization is basically a specific case of a multi-objective optimization problems where we require only the first step and the solution, the second step is not required, just simply because there is only a one optimal solution, so we have to take that only. So you can just think of that the single objective is basically a special case of a multi-objective where we have only the one objective to be optimized, and because of this reason we get only a one optimal solution. Now we just talk of a priori algorithm. Okay, the second categorization of solution methods means what we can think of. If we see carefully, the every trade-off solution corresponds to a specific order of importance of the objectives. I'm talking of basically this one. If you look for this solution, or any of the solutions basically, so here you just see that this is the F1 and this is the F2. For example, if this is F1 and this is F2, so this is basically a one trade-off solution. If you take this one, so this is another trade-off solution. This is the value of the F1, this is the value of the F2. You can think of that the F1 is more important. Suppose this is a minimization problem where F1 is to be minimized and F2 is also to be minimized. For example, actually, if I take it as a min-min problem, then this Pareto front is not possible. In that case, the Pareto front will be like this. But suppose you take it for simplicity that this is a min-min. So what happens is that here the one is emphasized whereas the other one is not. Here, if I take the another extreme, so one is emphasized where the other one is not. So if we have the conflicting objectives, then we can just think of that the solutions are basically the trade-off of the different objectives. Means we can assign a weightage, something like a weightage type of thing, that this is the weightage of this objective and this is the weightage of this objective. So that is basically written here in the first sentence, that if we see carefully, every trade-off solution corresponds to a specific order of importance of the objectives. Thus, if a relative preference factor among the objectives is known for a specific problem, there is no need to follow the posteriori approach. So what I simply say, that if suppose I already know that what is my preference of the objectives. Suppose for example, if it's a problem between the cost and the comfort, so what I want is that I want basically least cost and I want the maximum comfort. But there is no a single solution which is possible for this. So I say that okay, for me the cost is 80% important and say the comfort is only 20% important. So it means I say that the preference of the F1 is 80, I mean 0.8, and the preference of the F2 is basically zero point 0.2. Some other person may think of that, okay, cost is immaterial to me. So you just take it as zero point 0.2 weightage for the cost and zero point 0.8 weightage for the comfort. So in that case, you just see that these two are the two different trade-off solutions where we have defined that what is the preference of the objectives. So if we already know that what is my preference will be for the objectives, then obviously we need not to go for the ideal solution. Then why I will just waste a lot of time and energy to find a lot of solutions and then I will choose one. Then what I will do, first I will use the high level information, means what is the weightage of the objectives, and then I will club them into one so that it becomes a single objective optimization problem. Then I will use a single objective optimization algorithm and I will get basically a one solution. And that is what is done basically in the a priori approach of solving the problem. And it is written here that if we already know that what will be our preferences and we are concrete, there is no ambiguity, then there is no need to go for the posterior approach, which is known as an ideal approach. So what we do in the a priori approach, we can form a composite objective function as the weighted sum of the objectives, where the weight for an objective is proportional to the preference factor assigned to that particular objective. It converts a multi-objective optimization problem to a single objective optimization problem and finds one trade-off solution. In bracket I have written also may not find. So for it is written specifically that if the problem is non-convex and if you are using basically a weighted method, then you may not get a solution. So being a man of mathematics, you must be knowing that if we have a non-convex search space, then weights are not going to give us any solution in that particular reason. So what we do basically in the a priori, that is written here. So this is step one and this is step two. So they are just opposite of the previous one. If you look for this one, so this was step one and this was step two. In the a priori, this will become a step one and this will become a step two. If you just see here the figure, the things will be very clear. So this is basically a multi-objective optimization problem. I know that what is my importance of the objectives. So what I will do is I will use those preferences to convert this multi-objective problem into a single objective optimization problem. So these are basically the weights. So fmx wm, and I will just make a summation of it and I will just make it into a single objective. Obviously all the constraints will be there, variable bounds will be there. Now I have to solve basically the single objective optimization algorithm. So it is written here that it is converted basically into a composite function. Then I will use any single objective optimization algorithm and I will get basically a one solution and I am interested in this particular solution. So job is over. So we can either go for the a priori approach or the posteriori approach. But you will find that the books usually go for the posteriori approach and they emphasize the posteriori approach. And why they emphasize the posteriori approach? Because most of the real world problems are such that we do not know that what will be the Pareto front or what is the Pareto front. We do not know the solutions. Okay, for most of the real world problems, we do not know that what will be my importance. Only after when will we see that okay, what are the different trade-off solutions, then the persons think that okay, it's better to go for this solution or that solution. So because most of the real world problems are such that where the objective space is unknown and the Pareto front is unknown. So if it is unknown, then obviously it is not possible that we can define beforehand that what will be the weightage of the objective functions. So in that case, obviously it is better that try to find the whole Pareto front, means all the solutions which are possible, and then later on you think of that which is the solution in which you are interested. So we just discuss here the some more facts about the a priori. A change in the weight vector will result in a hopefully different trade-off solution. However, any arbitrary weight vector need not result in a trade-off optimal solution to all the problems. So this is basically the same thing which was written in the previous slide here, that you may or may not found. So that is written here in the sentence form, and this one is that a change in the weight vector will result in a hopefully different trade-off solution, and this is just simply because the search space is partially ordered, it is not fully ordered. So what happens is that even if you take the two different weight vectors, so maybe they will pose to basically a one single solution. So what I am saying here is basically you can understand it in a better way if I take this figure. So if suppose this is a solution, it is mapped to this particular solution in the objective space. You may think of another solution here also. Obviously, another solution here means its values of the x1, x2, xn, etc. are different. And if you apply the fx, maybe it will also pose to this particular solution. Means it will map to this particular solution. So this is because it is not it is partially ordered, not fully ordered. So it may happen that the two solutions may reach to basic two different solutions in the search space may basically map to a single solution in the objective space. So that is why I have written here basically hopefully, that hopefully they will map to a different solution, but this is not necessary. So it is not necessary that you will always get. Suppose if I say that I want multiple solutions, so it is not so that if I go for the multiple weight vectors, I will get as many number of solutions as many number of weight vectors are there. And the another one is that if suppose it is non-convex, it is not possible to get solution. So in that way also, if you think of, then a priori is not where you can is not a method class of the methodologies or a way to solve a problem which can be applied to any type of the problem. That is what I mean to say. Moreover, finding a weight vector itself is highly subjective and not straightforward. It requires an analysis of a non-technical, qualitative, and the experience-driven information to find the qualitative relative weight vector. Means you have to be an expert. So you must be a domain expert so that you can think of. So all these things are not always available at one place. So it's always better that you go basically for the posteriori approach and then you try to find a solution. So the posteriori approach, this is the posteriori versus the a priori. So the posteriori approach is less subjective. So I think obviously you must have understood that why I'm posing basically that the posteriori approach is better, because we are trying to discuss the algorithms where they do not take the preference of the any objective vector and they try to solve giving the equal weightage to all. So the plus point of the posteriori approach is basically that the posteriori approach is less subjective in nature. The problem information required at step 2 means problem is specific knowledge, is to evaluate the obtained trade-off solutions and not to find a new solution. So why I have written it here, because you may just think of that either you go for the posterior approach or you go for the a priori approach. We require basically the problem specific knowledge, because ultimately even if you go for the posterior approach, you have to think that okay, which solution I have to go for. So this solution is a trade-off solution of what is the percentage of the, or what is the weight of the objective functions. So in that way you may confuse yourself. But basically the major difference between the posteriori and I mean the major difference in the problem is specific knowledge, or the step 2 in the posteriori and the a priori is that in the posteriori we do not use that weightage information or the trade-off solutions information basically for the generation of a solution. Rather we generate a lot of the solutions and then afterwards we just see that okay, for the selection that which we have to select. So it is not used for the generation of a selection, but it is used only for the selection of a solution. So it is less subjective in nature. So thus there is a fundamental difference in using the problem information in both these approaches, means the posteriori as well as the a priori. The ideal approach is more methodical, more practical, and less subjective. The ideal means basically the posteriori. However, if the reliable weight vector is known, there is no need to find out the other trade-off solutions. Still, I just emphasize that if everything is well known in advance, then there is no need to go for the posteriori. You better go for the a priori approach and find a solution which is desired. So if you look for a multi-objective evolutionary algorithm, so here also you will find that there is no difference with reference to the single objective optimization. There also what we did, we generated basically a set of the feasible solutions, means the initial population, and then in the iteration, in the while loop, we went basically for the selection and crossover and the mutation. So in that way, this is exactly same. So the solution methodology for the single objective and the multi-objective is not different. The basic philosophy is exactly same, but the difference comes basically that in case of the single objective, because there is only a one objective, so they are much simpler. And in case of the multi-objective, because we have the multiple objectives, so it is not possible to get a one single solution. A lot of other complexity arises because of the multi objectives. So the solution, instead of getting a single solution, we get basically a Pareto fund, that is a set of the solutions. So what are the additional challenges that we discussed till now apart from that? So these two we have already discussed, that we get basically not a single solution but a Pareto optimal solution. and we require basically sorry that it is not a totally ordered, but that is the partially ordered. The another one is basically that achieving and monitoring the convergence towards the true Pareto front, achieving diversity and extent along the Pareto front, and avoiding the local convergence. So in the next slide with the diagrams, the things will be very clear that what is basically the meaning of this and what all these things are. So I've just taken here basically the minimization problem where the objective F1 as the F2 and as well as the F2, they both are to be minimized. So the minimum it is, the lower, I mean the lower it is the better it is. So this side it will be better, this side it will be the better. If it is possible to get a solution something like this or say somewhere here, then probably that will be the ideal solution, but it is not possible to get a feasible solution like this. So in this diagram, you just see that this is a one bold line. So this is written here the actual Pareto front. So when I say the actual Pareto front means that all these are the solutions which are the real optimal solution of the problem. So you just think of that this is basically a search space. In this search space, these are the best solutions. Okay, so do not consider this as a line. You consider as if this line is composed of a lot of points or the dots, where each dot indicate basically a one solution. So this is consisting of a lot of solutions. And suppose I am running the algorithm and that algorithm has generated a set of the solutions, and which is this one. Okay, that set of solutions is basically this one. So this is a set of solutions which is obtained. So it is written here that the obtained Pareto front at t, at t means at t generation, generation number t. Okay, so you just see that we, I mean the solutions have are not basically lying on the actual Pareto front. They are inferior in comparison to the actual Pareto front. Means they are inferior to the real solutions or the real optimized solutions. So this difference basically, okay, this difference is known as basically the convergence. Okay, so when we say that the solution has converged, it simply means that we have been able to obtain the actual solutions, means actual optimal solutions basically. So if it is inferior, it means the convergence is not proper. So convergence is basically related to that whether we have reached to the optimal front or not. Then we have a diversity. So the diversity is that maybe, for example, if I get one solution here, one solution here, say one solution here, then few solutions are here, say in this region, say few solutions are here, and I'm not able to get a lot of solutions, I mean solutions in this range or say solutions in this range. It means the diversity is not better. Okay, in case of the convergence, what is our aim? Our aim is basically that we have to converge fully, means the difference should be zero. So we have to converge basically to the Pareto optimal front. As far as diversity is concerned, what we require is that the solutions must be almost equidistant. They must be apart, equidistant means one solution is here, the another is here, another is here. So the difference, I mean the spacing between the solutions must be almost equidistant. What it simply indicates that I am getting basically the solutions over the entire Pareto front. So I have this solution also, this solution also, this solution also. Only then I will be able to define that I have to go for this solution or this solution. Suppose my algorithm is not giving me any solution in this region. So I'm not aware of any solution in this region. So how I can think of it? Okay. But suppose if my algorithm is giving the solution in this region, probably this is the solution which I may be interested in later on, if suppose I know it. So that is why we should have a good diversity also in the Pareto front. So the desired objective, one objective is basically that we should have a good diversity. And what is this extent? This extent is basically the extent of the front. So this is basically a one extent and this is the another extent, means extreme solution. So this is basically a one extreme solution and this is the another extreme solution. Suppose I get a solution between this and this range, okay, and on this Pareto front, and they are at almost equal distance also. So convergence is also okay, diversity is also okay, but again they are only in the part of the solution space, they are not basically in the complete Pareto front. In the complete Pareto front, so extent is not satisfied. So I may not know the solutions on this side and solutions on this side. Maybe I'm interested a solution in a solution which is here, sorry, solution which is here, or maybe solution which is here. So we must achieve the extent also. So what is basically the aim is, the aim is that we have to get basically the solutions in the entire Pareto front, as well as they must be equidistant also. So this is basically our aim. So whenever we design any ideal objective, ideal multi-objective optimizer or a ideal multi-objective optimization algorithm, so our aim is to achieve these three. So that is why it is written here the challenge 1, 2, 3. So apart from the other problems which we discussed, that instead of one we get multiple solutions and the search space is not partially ordered, because of this we have to deal with separately the decision space and the uh, decision space and the objective space, or the search space and the objective space. We have these problems also. But obviously you must be just thinking of that I have not discussed so far, that why we get basically the multiple solution, why it is not possible to get a single solution, why we get this Pareto front. So in the next slide it will be clear that why we get basically a Pareto front. So I have just written in this slide, I have just tried to show that what is basically the Pareto front and how, why we get it. Suppose if we get basically we have a population, and this population consists of these five solutions, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And you consider that this is basically a min problem. So when I say the min problem means that if f1 is minimum and f2 is minimum, then that is the good solution, otherwise it's not a good solution. So we have to minimize in both terms, f1 as well as f2. This is basically the concept of the dominance. Okay, I have written here the Pareto dominance. So this is basically a dominance concept. And what is basically the dominance concept that is written here? And with the help of the dominance concept, we get basically a Pareto optimal set. And how we do that and why it happens is here in this example. Now suppose if you take the solution number 1 and solution number 2, okay, and if I compare these two solutions, I'm not in a position to say that which solution is basically a good solution. Because if someone says that the solution 1 is good in comparison to the solution 2, just simply because its f2 value is lesser than the f2 value of solution 2 and we have to minimize. Okay, you just see that the f2 value of the solution 1 is better than this. Immediately the other person will say why, because the f1 value of the solution 2 is better than the f1 value of the solution 1 in terms of f1. Okay, obviously I say the f1 means in terms of f1. So in one of the objective this is better, in other of the objective this is better. So in this way, there may be a fight and they cannot resolve. I mean, the two persons cannot resolve that either the one is good or the two is good. So this is basically an unresolvable problem. So what we will say, we will just say that, okay, both are equally good. Okay. We cannot compare and say that either this is good or that is good. Similarly, if I take, for example, this 2 and 4, okay. So in this way, anyone, first let us take this 1 and 4, okay. Then I will just talk this one. If I take 1 and 4, so you can simply say that 1 is a better solution than 4. Why? Because in terms of f1 also this is good, in terms of f2 also this is good in comparison to the 4. So this solution is better in both the respects, so that is why this is a better solution. And you just see what we are saying here, that if for all the objectives, if I is, and this is for the min, this definition is for the min, not for the max or the min max or the max min. If fmi is less than equal to the mj for all m, okay, so there should have been basically a gap here, so just take as if there is a gap. And for at least one of the objective, this fmi is less than fmj, then we will say that the I solution dominates solution j. Okay, So if I say that this is I and this is J, so solution 1 is dominating solution J. Now, if I compare the solution 1 and solution 5, so here also I can say that the solution 1 is dominating solution 5, because even if they are equal in terms of the F2, this solution number 1 is better in terms of the F1 in comparison to the solution number 5. So this solution is better in comparison to, I mean, solution number 1 is better in comparison to solution 5 also. Now, if I take this whole as a one set, so you can just compare if all the solutions to each other one by one. So you will find that the solution number 2, solution number 1, and the solution number 3, all these three solutions are such that we cannot say that which solution is good in comparison to each other. Okay, but solution number 4 and solution number 5, they are dominated by some of the solution of the 1, 2, or 3. Like 4 is dominated by 1, 5 is dominated by 1 as well as 3 also. So these are the dominated solutions. So we are not interested in these dominated solutions. We are interested in the non-dominated solution. So if I take this as a population, so I will say that this is basically a set of the non-dominated solutions, and this is basically the Pareto front. So in this, you just see that solution 3 is basically a trade-off of the F1 and F2. Solution number 1 is another trade-off of the F1 and F2. Solution number 2 is another trade-off of the F1 and F2. So all these three solutions are basically the different trade-off of the objective function 1 and objective function 2. So this is basically a practical scenario. So now I think you have understood very well that why it is not possible to get basically a single solution in case of the multi-objective optimization, and we get basically a Pareto front. Just for the visualization purpose, I have this particular slide, and this is again basically a main problem. When I say the main problem, means that the F1 as well as the F2 both are being minimized. Okay, and this is basically a search space. So this dark shaded area, this is basically a search space. In this search space, if you just refer this dark line, okay, this one, so this is basically a Pareto front. So you just think of this diagram, I mean this image, and this dark area, as if it's basically a lot of dots are there, where each dot is basically a one single solution. Similarly, this line is also consists of a lot of dots. So all these are the Pareto optimal solutions. So when I say all these are the Pareto optimal solutions, or this is a Pareto front, means all the solutions which are here on this particular line, they all are solutions are such that we cannot say that which solution is good or bad if we compare the solutions in this Pareto front. But if you take any of the solutions which is in the other part, it is dominated by some of the solutions which is here in the dark line. So this is basically our aim, that we have to find this one. So in this way, and the same is written here, that a set of non-dominated solutions over the entire feasible search space is called a Pareto optimal set or the Pareto front. And in one sense, you can just think of it is something like a clustering problem, or say classification problem, where the search space consists of a lot of objects. Okay, solutions means the objects. If you treat them as objects, so a lot of objects are there, and we have to segregate these objects in such a way that on one side, or it means in one class, all the dominated solutions are there, and in the another class on the non-dominated solutions are there. So you can just think of it something like a classification problem also. So this is what basically we have to do in case of the multi-objective optimization. So now I will not take more time, just in 2-3 minutes. This is the last slide. I will just let you know that what is the basic principle of a NSGA2. So this algorithm was published in 2002. It's a very old algorithm, but I am taking this example because this is still the most popular algorithm, and still people use a lot, and not some algorithms have been developed which beat the result of this. So this is a very popular algorithm even today also, and the people are trying to beat this algorithm, that they should be able to generate, make an algorithm which is better than this. So people have done a lot of work, means they have tweaked this algorithm little bit here and there, but no one has come up with a altogether different philosophy or the different algorithm. Tweaking the algorithm here and there, something that is a different, that's only a modification in this one, but no one has come up with the altogether different algorithm. So that is what I mean to say. So what happens in this algorithm is that this PT is basically a parent solution, okay, and this QT is basically the children solutions. So this is the, for example, this is a population of size n. So n number of solutions are here, and these n number of solutions have generated these n solutions. So now this total is basically the 2n solutions, and this is PT means the parent and the QT means the children's, and when we combine this, so we call that as a RT, as the these researchers say. Okay. Then what we do is that with the help of this non-domination concept, which we discussed, which we see pictorially here and which is discussed here. So with the help of this, what we do is that we make basically the non-dominated fronts, different fronts are there. So this paper discusses a way that how we can find the non-dominated fronts very efficiently. So a very good algorithm is there to find the non-dominated fronts. So non-dominated fronts are made. So this is the F1, this is F2, F3, F4, F5, and so on. So when we say it non-dominated fronts, means the F1 are the best solutions till now, then they are the second best solutions, they are the third best solutions, and so on. But all these are basically the 2n, but we have to keep the population size fixed. So we cannot take all these 2n solutions into the new generation. So this is basically the next generation. This is PT plus 1. So this is the parent, and this is the PT plus 1 means the next generation. So we have to take basically only the n solutions from here to here instead of the 2n. So we will just see this, what is the size of this. If it is less than n, so they will be moved here. Then we will see this one. If the size of the mixture of these two is still less than n, then all these solutions will come here. Now we will take F3. In this example, if I take all the solutions which consisting of the F1, F2, F3, so the size becomes more than n. So it is not possible that I can take the solution, all the solutions here. Okay. And obviously there is no way that these solutions will be taken to the this side. So that is why all these are rejected. Okay, as it is written here, all these are rejected. But part of the solutions of the F3 also will be rejected. Okay, obviously because all cannot be taken here. So these are the solutions which are rejected. So it is as shown here. So what is the basis on which we will reject them? So what we do is that we check here in the F3 the diversity. What is basically the diversity? So the solutions which are in the more diverse regions, they are considered and they go basically in the next generation, and those which are in a very dense area where the diversity is not good, they are basically eliminated. And whenever we make the fronts, the F1, F2, F3, etc., at that time we take care of the convergence. So this Pareto dominance concept which is used here to make the Pareto dominant fronts, so convergence is taken care, and whenever we find it out that which solutions will go, part of the solution part of the solutions from a particular front which will go in the next generation, there the diversity as well as the extent is taken care. So in this way, this algorithm very nicely takes care of the convergence as well as the diversity and extent. And in this way, in each iteration by iteration, after some iterations, it is able to get a good solutions. So that is written here that elitism and diversity preservation using the crowding comparison operator. So the operator which they use to select that which one will go into the next generation and which one will be rejected, they call that as a crowding comparison operator. So if someone is interested in the multi-adaptive optimization, so you just refer this particular research paper and you will come to know that what this algorithm is and a very basic principle of the multi-adaptive optimization solutions also. So this was the last slide. So if you have some questions, you are most welcome, please. Whether there are some questions?
Is there any question from the participants?
So this is a very, yeah, please. Having no questions is a very typical situation. It means that either you have understood everything or you have not understood anything. So I doubt that people have understood everything. So I will just take it as if you have not understood anything.
Uh,
Thank you, sir.
so in that case, I will request Devjit.
Yes, sir.
Thank you,
You please
sir.
ask question.
Sir, sir, what sir taught today, like it was like a new topic for us. So we need to go through the content again. So in case, because like it like in 1.5 hours, gaining everything from a new topic is very difficult. So we have to go through the content again so as to get to know whether if we get stuck in any page or not. So as of now, like we just took what sir told, but hopefully we will face problem once we go to the slides.
Definitely, if you face problems, I'm not talking to you only, Devjit. I'm talking to all. So, as I just gave you an offer initially when I started my talk, that you all are most welcome anytime. If you have some questions, please ring me. Ring me, I mean to say that either you give me a mail or you can even ring me on phone also. So, if it is possible, I will help you to the best possible extent. And
I
I
can
will
meet.
be
I
happy if
can meet
some
you,
of
sir.
you go for this. Yes, sir.
I
That's
can meet.
how.
I can meet.
Yeah,
I can
sure,
meet
sir.
you for
Kindly, sir,
all my
share your
problem.
slides to Ajay, sir, and so that your contact number, I mean your mobile number and your email ID is there in the slide, as we can see.
Sure.
So once we go through your slides, if we face any problem, we'll definitely mail you at your mail. We will write to you at your mail. Okay, sir.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's up. You were saying something.
And I will meet you for solve my problem. I will discuss some of my problem with you.
Okay. Sure. You are always welcome, sir.
Okay, sir.
Sir,
Yeah, please. I
uh,
think
myself,
Miss Rajshri.
yes, sir. So myself, Professor Rajeshwar Gethe from Pune Institute of Business Management, Pune, sir.
Yes,
Sir,
ma'am. Please.
in the morning, I attended the Manoj sir session also. So, sir, I would just like to give the compliment to Manoj sir, about that Jamovi software, sir. You just taught us about the factor analysis that was truly good. And so I just having some more learning about that, sir. But if Ajay sir, who has organized these all FDBs for our better facilitation, so I will request Ajay sir also to sir kindly give us the contact number of all the faculties, sir, so that in future also we will get the good guidance from the all faculties, sir. This was only my concern, sir, because I want to learn more about that software, sir. That was actually.
Yeah, frankly speaking, sir, like this workshop brought us a lot of new topics in analytics. I mean, both how to represent data, how to make it more look visible, like to the clients, okay, and how to use it in research purpose. But what I think so is that the persons, I mean the corporates, I mean the ones who work in the corporates, they get to know these topics. I mean, they get to know the hold of these things after working with different projects. I mean, in case more than 5 to 6 projects, they get to hold these kind of topics. So so we also need time to go through these topics because these are new, and we also need to have a hands-on, because theory, going through the theory won't help us in it would definitely help us in understanding the thing, but working hands-on with some data on all these topics will help us to grasp the better clarity, help us to get a better clarity on these topics. So I think we need to work on projects rather than concentrating on theory, just the basic theory, and then we can get a follow up on the projects or the problems that are being faced in the current industry. I mean the business problems which are which the corporates are getting, and the ones who are working under those projects, they are they have the best clarity. So I think, sir, working hands on with these things rather than focusing more on theory, it would be helpful, sir. So we need a bit of time going through the topics. In 1.5 hours we cannot get the everything, so we at least we can get 5 to 10% at at minimum, but to get 100% we need hands-on projects so that we can get a better clarity of all these topics.
Mr. Devjit, not only to you, but after you just said something, I got an idea to just make it more clear that most of the experts, they must have talked about the multivariate data. What I did was basically that I discussed about not only the multivariate but the multi-objective. So it's basically a combination of a multi-objective as well as the multivariate. So I just gave you another way of also that a lot of problems in the real world are basically the multi-objective optimization. And whenever we talk of a multi-objective optimization, obviously they consist of a lot of variables. So I'm as a algorithmist, I'm not very much concerned about the lot of multivariants because variable is either 2 or 10, it's immaterial to me. So I just emphasize basically on the multi-objective. So I think this was a new perspective to all of you that someone talked about the multi-objective also along with the multivariates, which most of the experts have talked till now.
Yes, sir. I mean, to work on a project or to solve a problem, we need these things. So without knowing these things, we cannot approach a problem like having all factors. I mean, considering all the factors to a problem, we cannot go through that without knowing these variables. So that was a very good part on your side, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Ajay, I have a permission to leave.
Hello, sir.
I have a permission to leave.
Sir, I would like to thank you for giving such a nice talk, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, participants. We will meet again at 2 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yes.
kindly share your slides to Ajay, sir, so that we will be getting.
Sure. I'm just handing it over to the Dr. Ajay Kumar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir.